Baalbek, if there was one example, one ancient site on Earth that is evidence of a lost ancient advanced civilization hidden in Lebanon's mountainsides. Balebeck, a site of impossible stones, legends of giants and mysteries that even Rome's greatest engineers could not fully explain. For centuries, whispers told of gods, jinn, and forgotten civilizations. But now science has stepped in, and the revelations are more shocking than any myth. Why would builders carve stones so massive that they defied logic? Who ordered them? And why were some abandoned mid-task tonight? We uncover what archaeologists finally discovered about Baalbek and why it changes everything we thought we knew. The impossible blocks uncovered deep in the quarry just outside the Baalbek Temple complex. Archaeologists stumbled on something that seemed almost unreal. In 2014, a joint team from the German Archaeological Institute and the Lebanese University announced the discovery of a colossal stone, unlike anything seen before. Buried in layers of dust and rubble, they massive block, stretched nearly 20 meters in length and weighed an estimated 650 tons. So, put that into perspective, that's more than 3 million pounds of rock, making it the largest stone block ever quarried in the ancient world. It dwarfed even the famous stone of the pregnant woman nearby, which already stunned visitors at over 1,000 tons. This new find was given the nickname the Forgotten Stone, and in many ways it felt like it had been hiding, waiting for the modern world to notice it. The Forgotten Stone wasn't just another giant block. It posed a direct challenge to our understanding of what ancient builders were even capable of. Moving stones of 50 or even 100 tons was already impressive. The Great Pyramid of Giza used blocks averaging 2.5 tons, and its heaviest stones the granite beams above. The King's Chamber come in at around 70 tons. The Trilithon stones already sitting at Baalbek's foundation weigh close to 900 tons each. But this newly uncovered megalith doubled that number. It wasn't simply big, it was absurd. And the strangest part, it was left unfinished in the quarry, as though the builders had suddenly realized they had gone too far. This abandonment raises a chilling question. Why was it cut? All the Romans, after all, were notorious for documenting every significant undertaking. They kept meticulous records of construction, projects detailing who commissioned them, how much they cost, and the methods used. Yet when it comes to the Forgotten Stone, or even the Trilithon itself, there is silence. No Roman text, no engineer's account, no imperial decree mentions these megaliths. For a civilization that prided itself on its ingenuity and loved boasting of its achievements, that silence is deafening. It leaves us wondering, was this truly a Roman project? Or did the Romans inherit and build on top of something far older? Even experts wrestle with the contradictions. Margaret Vaness of the German Archaeological Institute suggests that the stone was cut using a clever but simple method, splitting limestone along natural fissures in the rock. Other words, it wasn't necessarily a miracle of engineering, but rather a practical exploitation of geology. Yet, even she admitted that the real mystery wasn't in the cutting, but in the scale. Why create something so massive when smaller blocks would have been easier, safer, and just as effective? As she put it, the Baalbek stones are bigger than they needed to be. And in archaeology, impracticality is perhaps the hardest puzzle to solve. The Forgotten Stone stands today as a contradiction in itself. Evidence of immense skill paired with decisions that defy logic. It proves the builders had both the knowledge and the ambition to push beyond necessity. But ambition alone doesn't explain abandonment. Was it a miscalculation, a demonstration of power, gone too far? Or a ritual act meant never to be finished? A symbol, rather, than a building block. If the Romans really built it, then we're faced with a strange question. Why push their skills to such extremes, creating something almost useless in scale? And that leads us to the next layer of the mystery. Rome's silence about Baalbek, a silence as heavy and immovable as the stones themselves. Rome's silence and shadows. If there's one thing we know about the Romans, it's that they love to talk about themselves. Their chronicles are filled with detailed records of roads, aqueducts, temples, and even minor engineering projects. From Augustus to Hadrian, every emperor took pride in, leaving behind not only monuments, but also the stories of how they were built. They documented the construction of the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and aqueducts, stretching across Europe. Yet when it comes to Baalbek's trilithons, the key foundation stones so massive they eclipse every Roman achievement, there is nothing. Not a single surviving Roman text mentions how the stones were moved, who ordered them, or why they were placed there at all. For a civilization obsessed with glory, this absence is staggering. This silence creates a void that historians still struggle to fill. Del Upton, an architectural historian, once described Balbeck as an architectural screen for projection, in his view, because there is so little written evidence about the site it has. Become a blank canvas, where myths, theories, and speculations have flourished without Roman explanations. Later generations invented their own, turning Baalbek into a stage where fact and legend blur. The sheer size of the stones makes the absence of documentation even stranger. If the Romans had really moved blocks weighing nearly 1,000 tons, wouldn't they have bragged about it? Wouldn't they have held it up as proof of Roman superiority? And yet their writings are silent, as though even they struggled to comprehend what stood beneath their temple. This mystery isn't a modern invention. For centuries, travelers, explorers, and scholars have been stunned into disbelief at Baalbek. One of the most striking accounts comes from David Urquhart, a 19th century Scottish traveler, in his diary from 1860. Urquhart described his mental state as paralyzed when standing before the massive stones. He devoted pages to what he called the riddles of Balbeck, admitting that the size of the megalith shut out every other thought and filled his mind with trouble. Urquhart asked questions that still haunt archaeologists today. What was the point of cutting such enormous blocks? Why attempt it in such a remote location far from major capitals or ports? And why, after so much effort, was the work left incomplete in his attempts to rationalize? The site ultimately failed, leading him to speculate that Baalbek must have been built by the contemporaries of Noah, using technology lost in the flood. While modern archaeology has moved far beyond Urquhart's biblical explanations, his sense of awe and confusion remains universal. Baalbek resists logic. Its stones are too large, its purpose too vague, and its history too silent. And in that silence, people across centuries have projected their own stories, whether of giants, gods, or forgotten civilizations. The lack of Romans' testimony isn't just an academic puzzle. It's an open invitation to wonder. So, if Rome's silence left behind a blank page, others rushed to fill it. Local traditions, biblical myths, and cultural legends all attempted to explain what reason could not. And those legends, they grew stranger, darker, and far more imaginative than anything history books had to offer. But if Rome stayed quiet, the storytellers did not. From tales of Cain and Nimrod to whispers of jinn striking in protest, Baalbek's legends became as colossal as the stones themselves. And that's where our journey takes us next. Legends of giants, jinn, and kings. When written history falls silent, legend steps in to fill the void. And nowhere is this more true than at Baalbek. For centuries, its massive stones have been credited not to ordinary builders, but to be larger, stranger, and more powerful than humans. Among the most enduring tales is that Cain himself, the son of Adam, constructed Baalbek after being cursed to wander. In this version, the stones were a refuge, a way for Cain to hide from God's wrath. Others point to Nimrod, the mighty hunter from Genesis, who allegedly commanded giants to build the complex as part of the infamous Tower of Babel. In these stories, Baalbek isn't just a ruin. It is a survivor. From biblical times, a scar left by humanity's earliest rebellion. Then, there are the tales of King Solomon, famous for his wisdom and his supposed ability to control supernatural beings. According to Middle Eastern traditions, Solomon enlisted the help of jinn, powerful spirits bound to his command, to construct a palace for the Queen of Sheba at Balbeck. In one particularly vivid variation, the jinn, frustrated or overworked, went on strike, abandoning the largest unfinished blocks in the quarry, the so-called Forgotten Stone, and the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, thus become physical reminders of supernatural rebellion. These stories may sound fantastical, but they provide a striking explanation for why such colossal stones remain unfinished. For the people who lived in the shadow of Baalbek, the idea that humans alone could have attempted such feats was unthinkable. But these myths are more than colorful folklore. They reflect centuries of awe, reverence, and attempts to claim ownership of the site. By linking Baalbek to biblical figures, local traditions embedded it within a sacred timeline, placing it alongside Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, and the Wisdom of Solomon. For Christian, Jewish, and Islamic traditions alike, Balbeck became more than just an ancient ruin. It became a living link to their stories. In this way, myth turned Baalbek into a stage where religion, culture, and history converged. Even as dynasties rose and fell, the stones remained demanding explanation, and legends provided it. So the nicknames given to the monoliths really spell wonder and symbolism in the same breath. The stone of the pregnant woman, for example, had little or nothing to do with size alone, as folklore states that women who touched the stone could get pregnant, while others say that once a pregnant woman fooled the town's people into feeding her with a promise of the secret involved in moving it. The evidence in these stories is how average people immersed Baalbek's unexplained engineering to the supernatural. The stones were not relics of the past, but alive in the cultural imagination strongly tied with fertility, prosperity, and divine intervention. It is such a great point. But what is intriguing about these myths is that they resonate in a universal pattern. All over the world, cultures have accounted unexplained megaliths to giants, gods, or spirits. From Stonehenge in Britain to the pyramids of Central America, the tale is the same. More grandiose scale construction goes beyond human comprehension. Myths take over. Baalbek's legends are a reminder that history is not just what happened, but also what people believed happened, and the way they made meaning of mysteries far too large to ignore. Yet as myths grew and spread, archaeologists began to dig deeper. What they uncovered suggested that Baalbek's story was even stranger when measured against science, and that the truth might be more unsettling than the legends themselves. Science versus impossibility. For all the myths about giants and jinn, archaeologists have long sought a more grounded explanation for Baalbek's mysteries. Excavations and surveys over the last century have confirmed at least one critical detail. The colossal trilithons were indeed quarried locally. Just 900 meters away from the temple complex lies the limestone quarry where the stones were cut. In some cases, unfinished blocks still rest there, half-carved and abandoned like frozen moments in history. The fact that the stones came from nearby is not disputed, but how they were transported from quarry to podium remains one of the most enduring puzzles in archaeology. Theories abound. Some argue that capstan, essentially giant winches, powered by teams of men or animals, could have dragged the stones along the ground. Others propose massive wooden sledges lubricated with water, or oil inching the blocks forward with sheer force. But these explanations begin to falter when confronted with the numbers. A block weighing 900 tons would require not just hundreds, but potentially thousands of laborers synchronized, perfectly working across uneven and sloping terrain. Even with the most optimistic calculations, the forces required strain the limits of what ancient methods could achieve. And then comes the greater problem: lifting the stones into position atop other massive blocks. Roman cranes, even at their most advanced, could only handle weights up to around 60 tons. That's impressive, but it's a fraction of what Balbeck demanded. What confounds researchers further is the question of necessity. Engineering at its core is about efficiency, achieving stability and strength with the least waste of time, labor, and material. Yet, Baalbek's builders appear to have done the opposite. Instead of cutting smaller, more manageable blocks, they chose to work with stones so massive they became almost impossible to move. Why risk disaster by attempting what no known technology could reasonably accomplish? Analysis shows the trilithons are not only stable, but larger than required. They weren't simply strong foundations, they were excessive ones. This makes Baalbek unique, not just as a site of great skill, but as a site of deliberate extravagance. That extravagance has drawn the attention of modern scholars. Margaret Vaness and her colleagues at the German Archaeological Institute classify Baalbek as one of several unnecessarily gigantic ancient projects. Alongside other sites, these monuments appear to push size far beyond practicality. Almost as if scale itself was the goal. This observation reframes the problem. Perhaps Baalbek was never just about building a temple to last. Perhaps it was about building something so outrageous in its scale that it defied comprehension, sending a message of divine or imperial power that went beyond function. In this view, Baalbek's impossible stones weren't mistakes of engineering. They were statements carved into rock. And yet the mystery deepens. If gigantism was symbolic, what did it symbolize? Was it the power of Rome extending into a new province? A continuation of older local traditions that equated massive stones with sacredness? Or was it something else entirely, a cultural obsession with proving dominance over nature itself? Archaeology can answer how the stones were cut, but it struggles to answer why they were made so big. Which leads to the shocking question: what if the size itself was the message? What if Baalbek wasn't meant to be practical at all, but a monument to impossibility, carved deliberately to stand as a challenge for every generation to come? The meaning of gigantism. At last we come to the question that has haunted every scholar, traveler, and dreamer who has stood before Baalbek's stones. Why? Why would anyone attempt to carve, move and stack blocks so massive that even modern cranes would struggle with them? Increasingly, scholars believe the answer may lie not in engineering necessity, but in symbolism. The sheer impracticality of Baalbek's megaliths suggests that their very impossibility was the point. By building larger than logic, allowed the creators of Baalbek made a statement that transcended architecture. It was an act of power, divine, imperial, or both cast in limestone. Think of it this way. While smaller stones would have sufficed for stability, they would not have inspired awe. But a stone so massive that it seemed immovable, that was different. To lift the unliftable was to display power not just over nature, but over imagination itself. The Romans, who incorporated the site into their empire, were masters of spectacle, and they understood the political weight of stone as much as the physical. Yet Balbeck is not purely Roman in spirit. Archaeological evidence points to features that don't fit neatly into Roman traditions, such as water basins before the temple and unusually high altars. These details suggest the site was a hybrid, where Roman imperial grandeur merged with local religious customs. Balbeck was both Jupiter's sanctuary and something older, a place where regional gods and traditions were woven into the stone. In that sense, its gigantism was not just about Rome. It was about creating a monument that embodied East and West, old and new heaven and earth. This fusion of traditions makes Balbeck even more fascinating. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was a canvas of cultural identity. To the Romans, its towering size demonstrated the empire's might. To local communities, it preserved connections to deities and rituals that predated Rome by centuries. And to later generations, its inexplicable stones invited myths of giants, jinn, and kings. Each culture found its reflection there, and each left stories layered on top of the stones like sediment. That ability to absorb meanings across time is what makes Balbeck unique. It was never locked into one narrative. It has always been many things at once. In the end, perhaps Balbeck's greatest secret is that it doesn't have one. The site may not be proof of aliens' lost civilizations or forgotten super technology. Instead, it is proof of something even more revealing: human ambition without limits. Our ancestors weren't just builders, they were dreamers who insisted on reaching beyond practicality. They created monuments not because they were efficient, but precisely because they weren't. The harder the task, the greater the glory. The more impossible the stone, the more divine the achievement. That impulse to go beyond reason, simply to prove that we can, is as old as civilization itself. Balbeck stands today not as a puzzle waiting to be solved, but as a mirror. A mirror reflecting every generation's fears, myths, and aspirations. From Cain's rebellion to Rome's ambition, from gin strikes to modern archaeologists. Theories Balbeck adapts to the stories we need it to tell. Its stones remain silent, yet they speak volumes about us. Our hunger for answers, our need for wonder, and our endless fascination with the impossible. And that obsession leaves us with one final truth. Baalbek is less a puzzle to solve and more a mirror reflecting the ambitions, myths, and fears of every civilization that touched it. Baalbek stands as both ruin and riddle. Its stones tell us about human genius myth-making and the limits of reason. Whether abandoned by jinn carved for gods or pushed into place by sheer determination, Baalbek remains one of history's loudest silences. And maybe that's why it fascinates us, because it refuses to give a straight answer. If you enjoyed this journey into ancient mysteries, like, comment, and subscribe, and don't miss the next video waiting on your screen for even more stories that challenge history itself.